Hello, everybody. It's Merlin here, and I have a movie review for you. And it's about a week after the fact, but I finally got the chance to see The Batman. And normally, I would try to see, big superhero movies like these opening night or first weekend. But honestly, I've been busy and rather tired, and it was 3 hours long, so it was difficult for me to really find the time and energy to do it. But I finally said, hey, I have to see it within the first week, or it's just, going to feel like it's too long, and then I'm going to wait until much later. And I know people have seen it and are kind of waiting to ask me how I felt. So I'm going to go into it. I saw it pretty much by myself, so I was able to kind of just have my own individual experience with the movie. And I've got some notes to guide me because I'm glad I actually had a day. I saw it last night, and so I'm glad I had a little time to kind of think about it because that's just typically how I like to do things. So this new Batman movie, um, well, I guess I'll say right off the bat, I'm going to try to not go into spoilers right away. I'll let you know. I just give you my general feelings about the movie. And I'm actually going to go by the notes that I wrote in this. Basically, it's a list almost in paragraph form, the things that kind of came to mind. So we'll do that first as an exercise, I guess. So, the Batman, I would say it is certainly edgy, dark, gritty. It's got a very art house vibe to it. This particular Batman film is very slow, meditative, reflective, somber. Huge noir elements here. You've got Batman pretty much opening with this narration, his monologues about his routines and how disgusting the city is and how dark things are right now and his own personal demons and whatnot. So you've got the detective angle as well. Thriller came to mind. David Fincher, things like Seven, Silence the Lambs. I just put Pattinson for Robert Pattinson because, okay, I think this is kind of fun. I'm going to read through these and then we're going to kind of try to make sense of it. Subtle Victory, which I thought was an interesting thing. We'll get into that later. Yeah, definitely have to go into spoilers. The score, as in the music. Um, Colin Farrell, I have as his own category. Uh, oh, and then I start spoiling my actual feelings about the movie. All right, well, it's been a week after the fact, so I'm assuming that if you want to see this movie, you probably have. But if you haven't, I'll try to get into a brief synopsis. Essentially, this takes place early in Batman's career, so it's kind of a reboot, though he isn't just starting out as Batman. He's been Batman for about 2 years, but this is still early in Batman's career. He's still fairly young. Gotham's kind of transitioning from that point where it was totally corrupt to where it is later in the comics, currently with Jim Gordon basically running things and all the corruption, the police force, and the mafia stuff pretty much resolved. But we're kind of in the middle of where that would typically be. So it's kind of an origin. It seems past an origin story though, because we don't need to know who Batman is. We just go right in there as a Batman story. So it feels like the stories or the comics have been running for a little while. So basically, within that, Batman's still trying to kind of find his way to become a hero, and there has a lot of corruption still in Gotham. And apparently, somebody else is upset about that as policemen, government officials, politicians are being attacked because they are also corrupt and they're being the target of this serial killer slash terrorist who is in this film the Riddler, and Batman has to go after him, and it's a really detailed detective story trying to stop this guy. And also, there's a bit of a romance with Catwoman, who's kind of tied up because she's connected with the mobsters like Falcone and the Penguin. And really, it's about their dynamic. She has a friend that goes missing that might be tied up in this web of deceit and conspiracy. And so they have to kind of work together for different reasons. And yeah, essentially save the city from the Riddler and his machinations. Oh, wow. Yes. Well, man, where to start? I'm glad I have those notes. I'm going to save some of these notes because they might spoil some things. Well, I'm going to start with the positives, which is probably going to be a lot of them. I will admit that it going into the movie, I was thinking to myself, man, it's 3 hours. Like, does this movie need to be an epic? And I was just thinking, and really, it was just kind of an inconvenience. Like, I was a little annoyed because I'd wanted to see it for days, and I was still kind of tired, even though I went to a slightly earlier showing. It was just like, man, it doesn't have to be 3 hours. And so the length of it was there, and I can't say that I didn't feel the length because, in addition to being a long movie, it is also a slow, deliberate film with a lot of slow buildup. But for the most part, I really didn't mind that. Once I kind of realized what they were going for, because the first shot is literally a couple minutes of from the view of somebody kind of staring at someone else, the Riddler's first victim, basically. And this isn't really a spoiler because it's just the opening of the movie, and we're watching this person's routine as he's stalking them, and we're not sure at first if it's Batman. Quickly realize it might be somebody else, and they get murdered. But it really takes its time because we aren't introduced to anything, just this person watching someone else, finding about them, watching the news, who they are, and then the murder. And it's the whole film is basically like that. It's this consistent atmosphere, which is really the main drive of the movie is the atmosphere and the performances. Well, and the script. Okay, but really it's oozing atmosphere, which if anybody has been watching my channel or knows me and my love of movies and just narrative storytelling in general, a big atmosphere can sometimes pretty much carry a movie for me if there is enough style and strong atmosphere. I love that. I love a very stylized art house kind of film, and this is very much an art house Batman movie, but it's not a little indie movie. It's a big one, just on that scale, and it's also kind of an epic detective story. Wow. So that's essentially the basic plot, which I think I'm going to start getting more into the positives and maybe spoilers going along, but I'll let you know when something big comes up. Basically, I love the atmosphere. One thing this film does really well. The thing, okay, I'll start off with the thing I think it does the best, which is mostly the style and the atmosphere, combined with the plot and performances. They all work very well together. But I wanted to say an asterisk because I know that I do think it's a very well made movie. Before I go any further, and I'll say that I liked it quite a bit. But I could definitely see some people maybe not liking it as much because of the length and because of the style and the type of storytelling. Because this is essentially Batman in a thriller, a pure thriller, a dark crime thriller, detective story, epic that is extremely dark and is not really that fun, campy, or even action heavy. It's not really that action heavy. It's much more about the investigation and the character dynamics and the twists and the of course the idea of Batman. But it's not really an action movie. More than any other Batman movie, even The Dark Knight was a lot more about the action set pieces than this. This is much more about the atmosphere. So I appreciate that this tries to be something new and refreshing and different, something we have not seen from Batman before, or from really superhero movies that much before, which I think is definitely something that stands out. So that's definitely a comparison there. And for me, going into this, I realized that I might appreciate this more in some ways now, but in a lot of ways, I think this is really the kind of Batman movie that I always wanted. That when I started to really get into comics, particularly Batman stuff, way back in my teenage years, a lot of the stuff that I liked the most, that I gravitated to with that character, and a lot of other superhero comics that I read, were much more adult oriented, darker themed, and it had Batman going up against serial killers and very demented villains and really investigating the criminal underworld and going against the mob. And he's got his somber narration. He's cold and distant and cut off, and he's usually alone. He doesn't let anybody else in. There usually aren't any sidekicks, and there's very little humor. So yes, my Batman, I really like this dark and gritty, and this reminds me of those like Tim Sale, Jeff Loeb comics, like Hush and like The Long Halloween. Some of my favorite stuff, like the and some of the other ones like Broken City. just really dark, dark detective stories, and that's just how I prefer Batman. And I'm not saying that Batman cannot have levity. Obviously, the Batman animated series was a great balance, and of course, Batman's a superhero. He can be fun and campy, like in some of the Justice League comics, or of course, even to some degree, the Tim Burton films, and of course, Adam West stuff. I'm fine with all that. It's a comic book character, very open to different interpretations, like most art forms, but comic books especially, there's a lot of flexibility and creativity, and I'm open to a lot of that, right? But personally, I've always really liked Batman this dark and gritty, and I wonder if I would have liked it even more years and years ago, but I still really appreciate it. And I kind of felt like, in terms of the style and the type of story, this is what I really want from my Batman movie. So, that probably spoils how I feel. Like I absolutely loved it, but I can totally see some people not, because I do think it's not a movie that is meant to satisfy every Batman fan or even every casual comic book or movie going fan. I don't think so. Like, even comparing to, say, The Dark Knight, I feel like, I'm sure I haven't, amazingly, have not been spoiled online or by anyone in my personal life. So thank you. Kind of amazing. But I can already see people debating, and probably for years to come, this versus The Dark Knight, because The Dark Knight was the pinnacle, pretty much for a lot of people. And I enjoyed The Dark Knight quite a bit. I was a huge fan of the Nolan Batman movies for the first couple of years they were out, but obviously over time I don't like them as much. I think they have some plot elements. I don't really like their interpretation of Batman's character and how his arc resolves. And I think those movies can really telegraph their themes and ideas very unsettlingly, really not giving their audience much credit. Whereas I think this movie is a lot more subtle. So, but The Dark Knight was also a little more campy and fun and pulpy, which is weird because The Dark Knight was really the dark, gritty, realistic one. But The Dark Knight was still a comic book movie, very bombastic, over the top, and fun. This is by far the darkest, grittiest, most grounded, and believable Batman movie I think has been made thus far. So I think it's kind of surpassed The Dark Knight in that sense, which maybe is a pro or a con, depending on what you think. But I think that really puts things in perspective. But basically, I'm saying for the plot and the atmosphere, I love it. Like, this is, I loved how this film is incredibly well shot and edited. And I will say it has a lot of darkness. Even I thought I couldn't quite see some things, and I realized, oh, that's deliberate, because when he talks about the signal and how it's kind of, spreading fear into the streets, and the criminals are literally looking to alleyways and looking into abandoned parking lots, and they're looking into the darkness, and I'm almost looking like, are they seeing something? They're not. They're just so afraid of the idea of Batman and him being part of the shadows, and that's so cool. That's done so well. Sometimes I do think that maybe it was kind of getting a little into the gritty, edgy angstiness of Batman, a little bit. But to be honest, it's Batman, so that's pretty much par for the course. And it wasn't too overdone. And I wasn't sure at first how I felt about Something in the Way by Nirvana, which was pretty much the only contemporary, semi-contemporary piece in the movie, but pretty much the darkest Nirvana song. Uh, I actually thought it was pretty appropriate. I also really like the song, so I guess I'm a Nirvana fan. What can I say? But in addition to that, the score really sells the atmosphere, because it perfectly mimics the movie, because the slow piano, bum 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 bum, dun 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 dun. That's the movie. That is that up building up to the crescendo, one note at a time, strong, steady, simple, but then building and building, and then it just hits you in the face with this powerful wave of emotion. And so good. So that was whew, yeah, no, that I absolutely fell in love with it. And really, it's most of the soundtrack is just that theme, just deliberately kind of released time and time again, and then building and building. But that's pretty much all it is. So the soundtrack's pretty simple, but works very well. Okay, so that's something else I kind of enjoyed. Oh, I'm just gonna kind of go in order here. Okay, let's also the Riddler and the investigation, the clues, the doing the Riddler, writing the Riddler has always been kind of difficult because you have to kind of come up with riddles, and the riddles they came up with were kind of appropriate to the plot, and some of them were sort of obvious, some of them not so much, but they seemed conceivable. And the visual designs and the voice work for Paul Dano, who did the Riddler, performed as the Riddler, was just really phenomenal as well. With that whole kind of cat and mouse thing, it was kind of echoing the Joker in the Dark Knight a little, but still very much its own thing. And we'll get into that a little bit later if I remember. But yes, that whole stuff with the set design and the murders and the investigations with the police reminded me a lot of. I felt like a strong David Fincher vibe with some of his thrillers, and I love. We just haven't had many really good thrillers, kind of going after killers, which was really big in the '90s, which were some of my favorite times. I feel like the '90s really were the decade for the thriller, and this felt like a throwback, just on a much bigger scale with that grittiness and darkness. Whew. Yes, indeed. Oh, and okay, Robert Pattinson. I mean, I don't know. This probably doesn't really need to be said either. Obviously, the guy got some Twilight hate, but I think it's been well documented that he didn't particularly like those movies. And I've seen some of his other stuff since then. He's a good actor and seems like a pretty cool person from what I hear. Very good. And when I heard he was cast as the Batman, because I had seen The Lighthouse not that long ago, in addition to a couple other films, I was just like, I'm pretty sure I saw a few more, but The Lighthouse mostly, I'm just like, okay, this guy is really an excellent actor, and I was confident he'd do well as the Batman, and he really did. Just as this really dark, kind of broken young man, but it's very believable. He doesn't say too much. You can tell he's very cut off, very damaged, not letting people in. My favorite Batman stuff. Though in the comics, I feel like he really is often still that way, even as he gets older. Of course, that changes writer to writer, but I think he sold that very well, and I enjoyed that. I think he has that perfect balance for this kind of dark, brooding Bruce Wayne and Batman. And the movie really has him as Batman, just Batman in the costume right away for a good chunk of the movie before we actually see him as Bruce Wayne. And I actually was like, well, I've gotten so much Batman. I wonder how he is as Bruce Wayne. And I pull it off outside. And I think to obviously do a superhero performance, you have to do the heroic aspect and the alter ego, even though in this case, Bruce Wayne's typically the actual alter ego because he's become the bat and overcome by the idea and the obsession of it. But Robert Pattinson, phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal performance. I love the look of the Batman suit. It's honestly, as much as I love the Michael Keaton one, and that's been my favorite for a long time, I really liked this Batman suit. I don't know, the look of him, and I with the dark eyeshadow around it, and the way it just kind of fit on his helmet, and the way they put the technology was really cool, where he has these contact lenses that basically are recording devices in his eyes. That was really cool. A nice touch. It was very minimalist. The way he fought was very. You could tell there was definitely some inspiration, probably from the Arkham games. I was reminded with those. Really, there's not a lot of flashy martial arts or a lot of gadgets, just enough to get things done, and really brutal, down and dirty kind of fighting. But that is reflective of the movie. Like, it seemed like Batman seems even more believable than he was in the Nolan movies. Once again, it's like I could feel like this is quite possible, all the stuff that's happening. So his portrayal of Batman was amazing. But really, the big surprise for me, performance wise, was actually Colin Farrell, because the credits came up and I saw Colin Farrell's name and I was like, where was he? Colin Farrell was in this movie, and then I just guessed later, was he the Penguin? Because I couldn't think of anyone else he was, because the Penguin was this bigger guy. Nominate that person for makeup. The team that did his makeup and the sold. Like, who? Please, somebody somewhere, some institution, recognize the people who did the makeup for Colin Farrell for the Penguin. Okay, that in addition to his performance, and of course, people that know me know I love the mafia stuff, organized crime stuff. I love that they basically made the Penguin an old school kind of Italian mafioso, and he really sold that. But man, with the makeup and his performance was really good. And I've got John Turturro as Carmine Falcone, the old mob boss. So that brings some mafia credibility because obviously he's got some of his connections with the Coen brothers, and you've got Miller's Crossing, which is an old mafia movie that he was involved with. So I mean, great casting there. Um, the gentleman that played Jim Gordon, I always forget his name, but he's a really good actor. He did an excellent job. He had really great performance as well and good chemistry with Batman. You really felt their partnership. Jeffrey Wright, I think it's Jeffrey Wright. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I love that actor. And he really seemed like he was almost this moral compass for Batman, which I liked. And you've got, I think Zoe Kravitz was Catwoman, and I thought she was a really believable character. I didn't really necessarily love her mask as Catwoman because it was just kind of this like ski mask sort of thing. But I wouldn't have minded just that the rest of her outfit was basically leather. But she had really good chemistry with Pattinson as Batman. It was a really believable kind of romance because at first it seems like he doesn't want to open up to her and he's just kind of using her for the investigation. Like I love that scene where she kind of goes into this club, the Penguins Club, the Iceberg Lounge, to infiltrate and find out about all the corrupt politicians that are there. And he's just like, go in there and talk to this person and record. And she's just saying, I feel like just kind of like a bait on a hook. But he does kind of care about her. And they had some really good chemistry, oozing chemistry. Definitely the best Batman chemistry since Michelle Pfeiffer with Keaton in Batman Returns. I know Batman Returns is pretty much my favorite Batman movie, but that's saying a lot. Like this one was more traditional to how Selena Kyle typically is. Actually, it was really good. There were some themes about obviously class differences as well, and some racial issues, but it was subtle, which I appreciated. I like the fact that the mayor was kind of running, and that she was kind of a bit younger. I thought that a mayor would be to run, but I liked when she tried to interact with Wayne because he was old money from a different institution. I thought that was an interesting little bit of class commentary there. That's kind of reflective of what was going on with Gotham in contemporary times too. Kind of parallels there. So that was really interesting. And I'm trying to remember the name of. That's right. Andy Serkis was Alfred, who was of course good. And I realized the director was the director that did the last couple Planet of the Apes movies. So it's like okay, which I liked the Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I think it was, which I believe he directed, but I hadn't seen the third one. And I knew he was like I liked the movie, but this guy's really definitely got some love for Batman because the director Matt Reeves did an excellent job, like amazing. But yes, I really love the performances from people here. Let's see, what else can I say? In terms of once again, kind of going back to my point about how it's more grounded. I think for as big and epic as this movie is, it's kind of almost as subdued as Batman could still be. And I remember people used to say about The Dark Knight how, it was not just a great superhero movie, it's a great film, like it's a great crime thriller. And, I realized once again, like that is true, but this movie, obviously the draw is Batman and the Riddler, but once again, I think you could say that certainly much more about this movie because after I was done watching it, I realized if you took out Batman and just made him some rogue detective or a vigilante and took away the Riddler, a couple of the basic Batman things and just switch the character names around, this really could be just a really good thriller. I don't know if many people would have seen it as much, but it would have been really just as good without the Batman element. And yet, at the same time, okay, it is not only is it a really good film by itself that does not need to rely on being a Batman movie, it is simultaneously an excellent Batman movie that is so driven by Batman and oozing Batman stuff, the classic dark Batman, going back to the Paul Dini comics and the Neil Adams stuff in the 70s and really just kind of, so it's amazing that it does both, which I think speaks volumes about what type of film this is. Whew. I think that's just really amazing as well. But I haven't even gotten to the biggest thing yet. So in addition to it being such a great Batman film, really because it's also about, as he's investigating things, we kind of realize that really the Riddler is kind of going against old institutions, and he really has it out for the Waynes in addition to everybody, because there's kind of this idea that this idea for a renewal project became basically a money laundering operation that all of these mobsters and corrupt businessmen took advantage of, and instead of helping the city, it just continued to kind of rot as they took over and made things worse. And the mafia literally runs the city, and a lot of the police force really just works for the mob, and people in the DA, and really just a lot of people in power. Really, at its core, it is completely corrupt in the sense that the criminals do basically run the city. And this idea that maybe the Waynes were in Falcone's pocket, and there's this twist of thinking, oh, okay, did the Waynes have something to do with this person's murder, which is another reason why the Riddler is feeling so vengeful against the Waynes and what they did, because his belief is that they kind of betrayed the city and are responsible for the things that happen in his life and other people. So the Riddler is a really fascinating villain too, but I'll come back to him. but I just think there's a lot going on there, and just with it's that classic story of Batman still trying to kind of figure out what he wants to do and who he really is and what he wants to be. And it kind of all leads up to well, first of all, there's this point where Alfred, like the Riddler goes after Alfred, and you think he's pretty much dead, but he's not. But the movie almost convinced me they were going to kill Alfred. But I can't. I think this movie had a pretty wonderful impact on me, because it's the first time that a Batman movie. I don't know if I could say this about any superhero movie, but it's the first time a Batman movie made me tear up. And I know you might think, in this dark, gritty movie, like this thriller, this you found a time to cry. I shed a few tears. I did, because, and maybe this is also something about just where I am in my life, but it was just interesting when you view a character at a different point in your life, how different it might have been when I was 16 or 20 or whatever. But I really, at first, I wasn't sure what they were doing, because of course, there's a big plot with the Riddler kind of trying to kill a bunch of people because he essentially has a cult of extremists following him online, which is, once again, pretty contemporary commentary on current issues. But it kind of leads to Batman having to, stop the bad guys as the Riddler is kind of just, cackling maniacally, essentially back in Arkham, as his henchmen do something, which is also very unique. But although Batman does save the day, this is also something very different from any other superhero movie I've ever seen, I think ever made, is that instead of a big fight with a big villain and lots of explosions and martial arts or whatever it may be, this one has a very quiet moment where the pinnacle of the movie is Batman actually kind of realizing he has to do something differently. And it actually has the pinnacle of saving people as a quiet moment, when Batman just sort of jumps down into this flooded stadium area. Basically, it's like Madison Square Garden, essentially, where all these people were gathered as the city was being flooded by these explosions. And he goes in there, and Batman, who has basically been such a symbol of fear for people that even good people are afraid of him, basically his arc for the movie is realizing that maybe being vengeful and being so caught up in that idea maybe isn't really good for healing and isn't good for truly helping people. And we actually do get to see that softer side of Batman, kind of him rediscovering his humanity a little bit, as he just kind of reaches out to kind of connect with these people, literally lift them out of the wreckage, and Batman guides them out with another long, slow, beautiful shot, which I know some people might think it's kind of pretentious, but I think it's just, the whole film really was just kind of a work of art. It was beautiful. And that moment was so powerful. And I know some people might think it was a little corny, but really it felt understated and deserved. And honestly, it was kind of like a relief after everything, that at the end of this film that was so dark, it really was kind of like on this hopeful note that it was ending. And Batman's monologue about, being a symbol of hope and people kind of having faith in each other and needing to help each other was just, it really hit me. And it was just really great to see, once again, even in this dark film, Batman doing that simple heroic thing of just helping somebody else in need after some big disaster. Because I think we often think about heroes just kind of fighting the bad guy and getting into big fist fights and whatnot, all the spectacle. But this movie just ends on a very grounded human level. And I think that's just the whole movie. There's just a lot of strong human interactions wired within this very well written, intricate thriller with twists and turns as a true detective story. And we've never gotten to see Batman as a detective. And this was just 100% like the detective Batman movie, which we've never gotten. We've never seen him do a really good investigation. That's just another big aspect is, and detective stories are usually slow and meditative, and it's about taking things in. But it was really good. So it definitely felt long, but I appreciated the length of it because it was such a big story. And I like those long shots and the strong atmosphere because I think they really bring the movie to life, even though it took me a long time to see it. Um, yeah. So, as far as like minor things, like I said, I think the length might be an issue for some people. Maybe it could have been a little shorter, uh, but I don't know. I think that the atmosphere of it was still pretty strong, and they sold me on it by the end. I'd watch it again, though I do think that there could be a little bit of a Return of the King issue, which is I think a high compliment because Return of the King, of course, is a great film, as all the Lord of the Rings films are. I think most people pretty much agree on this. But the Return of the King, despite being an excellent, essentially perfect movie, right, still has those 9 endings. And this movie should have. I really would have liked it if the movie just ended right after his speech and as the sun's coming up and he's helping people as the rescue workers are coming in, like that nice hopeful note. But then they have to have the romance kind of resolved, and then they have to have a little plug in for another movie, which was good world building. And I'm glad they didn't end all that scene. The movie feels like it could be its own thing, but they had a couple different endings there. And I'm like, all right, it's almost a Return of the King thing here, which is not really a negative, but I'm just saying, could have probably ended 2 or 3 times earlier. But it's like they couldn't decide on which ending they wanted to go with because they were all so good. So put them in there, which, hey, if I was making the movie, I probably would have done the same thing. So hats off to these people. I think every scene in it was gold. So, that if you have a lot of good stuff, you just have an extra long movie, I guess. Yeah, I'm saying it. Let's see. Anything else I could kind of mention here? Oh, I guess once again, the plug, the Riddler might be back. He was a very interesting villain. I think that I thought Paul Dano was doing really good, mostly through the voice work, and he definitely plays a man who's very unhinged but still brilliant, and his stuff once again seems more believable. I think maybe even than the Joker, who we don't in the Dark Knight, because Heath Ledger's Joker, it's like, how did he get all this stuff? How did I have all these resources? I could believe that the Riddler had help with other people over time, being an online person, and this is of course the darkest Riddler I've ever seen, but he worked too in this particular setting. So I think this is an excellent version of the Riddler. And and of course he ends up in Arkham and he's talking to somebody in the cell, and it's clearly the Joker. But it felt like a nice way they might end a comic with sometimes the villains are in Arkham together and having a little exchange. So even if it doesn't lead to another movie, which I'm sure it probably will, but even if it didn't, this could be its own self-contained thing, and I really like that. It just feels like it's not as much of a product as, say, as much as I liked No Way Home, Spider-Man. I loved that movie, but for a completely different reason, because it was completely kind of fan based and really a lot of callbacks to other films. And I'm thinking that movie could be really dated in, I don't know, 10, 20 years if you didn't see those specific movies. This one, if you just like Batman at the moment, it's not really connected to anything else. And it seems like it would have a longer shelf life, maybe. So I don't know. I think that really says something too. And I do admit, I believe this movie, I remember them talking about the Riddler and the Penguin kind of having their own film. That would have been another additional script back when The Dark Knight Rises came out. That might have been the 4th movie. So this has probably been a script general idea that's been kicked around for a long time. Who knows how long it's been or how much it's been changed, but it is funny. This is probably still a hangover from that, because I remember them talking about those villains again, but hadn't mentioned it in years. So maybe the blueprint of that idea they kind of jumped off of. And initially, I did kind of think that this movie was going to be too Nolan-y, and I could definitely see the Nolan Batman just being in this movie and doing the same story, but in a more Nolan-y way. And it would have, I could definitely have seen it, but this movie had its own identity, its own feeling, its own vibe. and it's certainly its own thing, and I really appreciate that. Pattinson did an excellent job. Oh, wow, yeah, absolutely. So I had a thought there at the very end, and I was like, what was it going to be? Something about the Dark Knight, and oh yes, one final thing, not to compare it to the Dark Knight again, but also I'm with the trailers. You saw him kind of being like, where are they? And and I was like, oh no, and they're not going to do the stupid growl because even if you love the Dark Knight, even if you think it's the best movie ever, and I do think it's a good film for the most part. I have issues with Batman, some bigger character things. I'm not going to go off on that again, but I'm always amazed by how so many people can overlook the fact that the voice is terrible. And this movie, I think I'm glad it's here because it shows that there's a way to do the Batman voice that's not ridiculous and silly. Because how can you take it seriously if he's like this? I mean, I sound more like Yoda when I do it, but where are the other drugs going? See, this one, he just changes his voice so it's a little more gravelly, like Batman does, because he has such control over his voice, he can't hide it. And he sounds different than when he's just Bruce Wayne. So great acting, great directing. Oh, who knows? Maybe I'd watch it again and I might not like it as much, but I'm glad I didn't go off the cuff and review it right away. I like to think about things and let it sink in. And yes, this is an excellent movie. I mean, I'd probably give it like an A plus maybe. I all my negatives were nitpicks for me. But like I said, I could totally see some people not liking this. I apparently somebody said they thought it was boring, but everybody else said they really liked it. So I think if you really like a dark, gritty Batman and you're really into thrillers and detective stuff, crime thrillers, things like that, I think you're really gonna like the movie. If you're really into atmosphere and really moody stuff, you like noir. I think if you like the art house stuff, you're really going to enjoy this movie. But if you like traditional superhero stuff outside of Batman's darker stuff, I don't know if you'll necessarily like it because it's not very action driven. But it's very smart. It's well written, powerful performances, great soundtrack, great camera work, and lighting. Oddly enough, though it's dark, that car chase with when he comes out, they used it in the trailer with the old Batmobile, which I loved it because it's basically like a hot rod sort of thing, just coming out of the fire when he's going after the Penguin was really cool. Yeah, so it's a well-made movie, very well made. I yeah, I don't know. It's who yeah, I'll be honest, I did not think this video was going to be as long, but there you have it. So if you saw recommend you see it if you like Batman because you probably have seen it already. I would definitely watch it again, even though it's 3 hours long. So don't know if I loved it quite as much as Dune, but I will admit I think this movie has more substance than Dune because Dune was really a great spectacle. And that's a movie that I think, much like Mad Max, is carried much more by the style and the atmosphere and the performances than the plot specifically. But I think this one had a much stronger concrete plot because a detective story, if it's good, has to, right? All right, Merlin's talked enough. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend, great week, and yeah, I'll see you all later. Stay magical.